A bright electronic jingle plays as the camera fades in, revealing Tomas Jennings, the channel host, standing against a warm, sunlit backdrop of his cozy living room. The moment the video begins, Tomas addresses the audience with a smile. "Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you enjoy these stories and all the twists and turns, don't forget to like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next." He sets a playful tone, reminiscent of any typical content creator seeking engagement, but there's a subtle hint of excitement in his eyes. His words, while genial, carry an undercurrent that suggests more than just another vlog or casual update. He leans closer to the camera, nearly whispering, "I've got some wild tales from the neighborhood that you'll have to see to believe. Buckle up, because it's about to get interesting." Tomas's channel typically features comedic sketches and tips about home organization, but in this intro, it's evident he's delving into something new, a real-life clash he's been drawn into. He gestures at a half-unpacked box by his feet, explaining he just moved into this house, which was supposed to be a personal milestone. Instead, he implies, he's already encountered unexpected turbulence. "This is supposed to be my dream place," Tomas says with a wry grin, "but things are complicated. Let's just say some folks aren't as thrilled about my settling in as I'd hoped." He offers no further details, simply teasing the viewer with an impending revelation. And yes, there's a story behind it, one that involves property disputes, unbelievably petty rules, and characters you wouldn't believe if I told you. But I'll let the footage speak for itself. As if sensing the viewer's mounting curiosity, Tomas steps to the side, pointing the camera toward a hallway where a few cardboard boxes line the walls. He narrates a quick snapshot of his move-in day, praising the tranquil street, the tree-lined sidewalks, the quaint local diner at the end of the road. The scene should have been idyllic, he explains, but soon turns surreal when certain neighbors questioned his very right to be there. He shares no names yet, careful not to give away all the intrigue at once. But his tone grows tinged with exasperation. "Honestly," he says, shaking his head, "if you told me last week I'd be dealing with bizarre accusations and mountains of paperwork right after moving in, I'd have laughed in your face. But here we are." The camera lingers on his boxes as he wraps up. "Alright, that's all I can say for now, just trust me, you'll want to see what's next. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss part 2, because that's where things start to heat up. I appreciate every like and comment, truly, it helps me keep going. Stay tuned for a real-life drama that's way more intense than anything I could make up." With that, he flashes a final grin and lifts a piece of bubble wrap in a mock toast. The video fades out, leaving viewers anticipating the promised confrontation and the unstoppable chain of events that Tomas has all but guaranteed is on the horizon. Tomas Jennings had scarcely finished filming the cheerful intro when he encountered an all-too-familiar sight, Karen, his new neighbor, loitering beside his car. Her posture was anything but casual. Dressed in a pastel blouse and wielding a suspicious set of keys, she hovered near the sedan's rear bumper, peering intently at the paint job. Tomas froze in mid-step, uncertain whether to call out her name or capture evidence of whatever she was planning. He recalled her earlier remarks, dripping with condescension, about how newcomers should abide by strict rules the HOA supposedly enforced. He'd politely nodded at the time, assuming she might just be overzealous about community standards. But now, witnessing her unwelcome inspection of his vehicle, he sensed a bolder intrusion. Tension coiled in his stomach. Determined to avert a full-blown confrontation, Tomas approached calmly. "Something wrong with my car?" he asked, injecting a light tone despite the knot in his chest. Karen turned slowly, eyebrows arched in false innocence. "Oh, I was just noticing a dent," she replied, tapping the paint with a fingertip. "Could be a violation, you know, unsightly vehicles in the neighborhood. Might have to file it with the HOA." Her smugness set Tomas on edge. Still, he tried to remain cordial. "I wasn't aware a scuff or dent violated any standard," he responded, scanning her expression for signs of real concern. She made a dismissive shrug, lips twisting into a smirk. "We can't allow junkers on these streets," she said. "I'm simply ensuring we keep property values up." Suspicion flared in Tomas's mind. Was she genuinely worried about property values, or was this an excuse to meddle? She carried a sense of petty authority that made him uneasy, reminiscent of hall monitors from his school days, controlling trivial details. He swallowed a retort, not wanting to escalate tensions, especially since he'd just moved in and hoped to keep peace. But then he noticed something that sparked alarm: the faint scratch on the driver's door, fresh enough to show a curl of paint. Tomas's pulse quickened. Had Karen done that deliberately while inspecting his car? He locked eyes with her, searching for a flicker of guilt. Instead, she gazed back defiantly, phone in hand, as if daring him to accuse her. Inwardly, Tomas weighed his options. If he confronted her too harshly, she could spin the narrative, painting him as the aggressor. Yet if he let it pass, he'd risk normalizing her sabotage. Striving for a balanced approach, he pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo of the scratch. Karen shifted her stance, seemingly irritated at his caution. "This has gone too far," Tomas murmured, half to himself. In the distance, a neighbor watched quietly. The moment felt like a crossroads. Would Karen continue her intrusive crusade unchallenged, or would Tomas stand firm, collecting evidence and calmly pushing back on her antics? Exhaling slowly, he steeled himself, no longer oblivious to the drama about to unfold in the next chapters of his suburban adventure. Jonah Miller never expected Karen to linger so close to his car at the crack of dawn. He'd just moved into his cozy house on Honeydew Court, excited by the tranquil vibe, until he caught a glimpse of Karen leaning over the hood, something glinting in her hand. His heart rate spiked as he hurried forward, phone ready to snap a photo if necessary. Up close, he spotted the faint scratch etched into the paint, fresh enough that tiny paint flecks clung to Karen's fingertips. She jerked upright, narrowing her eyes in a silent challenge. For an instant, neither spoke, the hush broken only by the early morning birdsong. Finally, Jonah managed, "Why are you touching my car?" Karen scoffed, wiping her hand on a pastel cardigan. "Because it's too close to the property line," she announced, voice dripping with disdain. Jonah let that sink in. Property line. He'd parked legally by the curb. The entire complaint sounded absurd, merely a cover for her meddling. In years of living in different neighborhoods, Jonah had encountered his share of nosy neighbors. But Karen's direct attempt at scratching his car indicated a more malicious streak than mere curiosity. The scratch, while minor, felt like a breach of trust, an unwanted escalation. Jonah swallowed his anger, determined not to feed her a reason to play victim. "Look," he said, trying to keep steady, "my car isn't blocking anything. I parked where it's allowed. That scratch looks pretty intentional." She pursed her lips as though offended by the insinuation. "I was merely checking if there was already damage," she countered, flipping the narrative. "Consider it a favor. I'd hate for you to blame the HOA if you found random scratches later." Jonah tightened his grip on his phone, resisting the urge to record her every word. "I'd prefer you not check anything on my property," he retorted, voice carefully even. The tension coiled anew, as though a single harsh breath could spark a bigger confrontation. That's when Officer Ramos appeared. Jonah's neighbor across the street, apparently unsettled by the exchange, had called the police upon seeing Karen's suspicious stance. Ramos approached with measured steps, hand hovering near his belt, scanning the scratch in Jonah's car. "Is there an issue here?" he inquired, posture guarded. Karen wasted no time. "He's harassing me," she blurted, pointing at Jonah as though he'd brandished a weapon. Jonah stifled a grimace. Her immediate pivot to victim mode was almost predictable. The officer turned to Jonah for an explanation, eyeing the fresh scratch. With a calm he barely felt, Jonah recounted how he found Karen by his car with paint flecks on her hand. The policeman nodded slowly, suspicion creeping into his gaze, but withheld any immediate judgment. A hush fell. Karen stood rigid, clutching her phone, likely itching to film if Jonah showed even a flicker of aggression. Meanwhile, Jonah swallowed the knot in his throat, telling himself he had to handle this with composure and clarity. If he let anger control him, her narrative of harassment might take hold. Instead, he drew a slow breath, silently promising that evidence, and reason, would be his shield against her contrived accusations. Len Hawkins had pictured a quiet afternoon polishing his newly purchased sedan, a symbol of the fresh start he'd built after a grueling career. Yet, in Sagewood Mews, tranquility was short-lived thanks to Karen, the outspoken neighbor who had already made her displeasure clear about everything from fence heights to the color of Len's front door. As he finished wiping away dust on the car's shiny surface, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision, Karen, clutching something metallic, edging suspiciously close to the passenger side. In a heartbeat, Len moved to intercept her, stepping around the front bumper just in time to catch the flash of steel. She was indeed poised to scratch the paint, her face twisting in anger or perhaps satisfaction. The shriek of metal on paint was brief but audible, a fleeting sound that made Len's stomach drop. "Stop," he called, more startled than furious at that moment. The hush of the suburban street magnified his alarm. Karen turned, weapon, some kind of tiny key or pointed tool, still in hand, a triumphant or defiant glint in her eyes. Before Len could confront her further, she pressed her phone's screen, face hardening. "Help! 911, she cried, feigning panic. "This man's threatening me." The sudden shift from aggressor to self-proclaimed victim left Len speechless. He watched as she delivered a rapid, breathless explanation to the dispatcher, painting him as the harasser. Moments earlier, he'd merely been polishing the hood. Now, he stood accused on a 911 call. The audacity stung like a slap. Realizing how easily an innocent person could be vilified by a quick phone call, Len took a decisive step. He fished out his own phone and started recording. This was no time for second-guessing. Documentation might be his only lifeline against a twisted narrative. "Karen," he said calmly, letting the camera capture her and the visible scratch. "Why are you claiming I threatened you when you're the one who damaged my car?" She turned briefly, phone still glued to her ear. "He's filming me," she shrilled into the phone. "I feel unsafe, he's using his camera to intimidate." A wave of exasperation washed over Len, but he kept his voice level. "I'm filming for evidence," he declared, ensuring the lens caught the fresh scratch on his sedan's door. "I have every right to record when I'm being falsely accused." Soon enough, red and blue lights swept the corners of Sagewood Mews. Officer Delgado emerged from the patrol car, scanning the scene with professional detachment. He'd fielded countless neighbor disputes, but the stark line of a scratch and the tension saturating the air told him this was no trivial spat. Karen, noticing his arrival, sobbed dramatically about harassment and how she barely escaped with her life. Len approached the officer, phone still capturing audio. "Sir," he began, voice steady though his nerves frayed inside. "I was polishing my vehicle." Ms. Karen approached with a pointed tool, likely a key, and scratched my paint. Then she called 911, labeling me the aggressor. Delgado eyed the gouge in the paint, eyes narrowing. "Is that so?" he asked, turning to Karen. She dropped her hysterical tone a notch, evidently unsure how to spin the physical evidence. Still filming, Len repeated key details, the angle he discovered Karen at, the abrupt screech of metal on paint, her immediate pivot to call the police. Delgado nodded along, occasionally jotting notes on a small notepad. "Ms. Karen," he finally said, "your 911 call claimed a direct threat. Where's the aggression you're describing?" She fumbled with her phone, as if to replay a non-existent recording. "He's menacing me with that camera," she insisted, but the officer's skeptical look suggested he wasn't fully convinced. As bystanders emerged, neighbors with half-curious, half-sympathetic faces, Len felt a flicker of reassurance. He wasn't alone in witnessing Karen's hostility. Some quietly offered to speak up if asked. Meanwhile, Delgado asked for Karen's explanation of the scratch, and she muttered about inspecting a pre-existing dent, a flimsy excuse. The officer frowned. "Ma'am, that dent appears suspiciously fresh," he observed, pointing to paint flecks still on her fingertips. At that, Karen's faux tears dried, replaced by fury. "You'll regret accusing me," she snapped, but the threat fell flat. Delgado carefully tested the scratched surface with a gloved hand, confirming it was new. Shaking his head, he closed his notepad and told them both he'd file a preliminary report. "I recommend you settle this civilly, or we might be looking at vandalism charges," he warned. Len lowered his phone, relieved but not complacent. He saw the glint in Karen's eyes. Her vendetta was far from over. For the moment, the arrival of law enforcement had halted her scheme, but the ripple effects would continue. Tucking his phone into a pocket, he allowed himself a silent vow to remain vigilant. In a neighborhood where a single phone call could invert victim and villain, every moment of calm was precious, and every interaction demanded the shield of documented truth. Santiago Ramirez stood in his living room in Timberline Shores, phone pressed to his ear, explaining the bizarre situation to an old friend from out of town. He recounted how Karen, the meddlesome neighbor, had not only scratched his car but also begun spreading outright lies to the local community board about unauthorized animals and other petty transgressions. That alone would be annoying enough, but what truly alarmed Santiago was the sudden disappearance of his beloved cat, Honey. Days before, he'd posted flyers, roamed the streets searching for Honey, and asked neighbors if they'd seen a gray tabby prowling around. No luck. Then rumors circulated that Karen might be behind more than just false property claims. Some alleged they'd seen a cat resembling Honey in her yard, though no one had proof. Now, uncertain how to proceed, Santiago found himself confiding in anyone who would listen, hoping to gather leads. The tension hit a peak when Officer Fulton, responding to the repeated neighbor complaints, arrived at Santiago's door. Initially, the officer focused on the car-scratching incident, a separate drama. But as Santiago explained the bigger picture, Karen's suspicious past, her possible catnapping, and her pattern of malicious gossip, Officer Fulton's brows rose. "That's quite an allegation," he observed. "You believe she took your cat?" Santiago nodded, frustration tinged with worry. "I can't be sure, but it's suspicious. She's been known to meddle in people's business, and with all these bizarre rumors about my so-called violations, I can't help but suspect she's behind Honey's disappearance too." The policeman jotted notes, then gently reminded Santiago that they'd need evidence to act. That was precisely the problem. Karen operated in shadows, sowing discord while keeping direct proof just out of reach. Still, Santiago refused to give up. He scoured social media, posting updates in local groups. That's when neighbors started chiming in, sharing their own negative encounters with Karen. One posted about how Karen confiscated a stray dog from someone's yard, claiming she was protecting it from unfit owners. Another recalled finding half-eaten cat food in her backyard after Karen visited. The chatter ignited a wave of discontent, with residents piling on stories about missing items, mysterious yard damage, and strange notes in their mailboxes. None directly linked Karen to criminal acts, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Timberline Shores soon buzzed with talk of a possible catnapper in their midst. Some neighbors were furious. Others, previously neutral or partial to Karen, now realized how destructive her meddling could be. The gossip inflated quickly, with screenshots and alleged text messages swirling online. Santiago found it surreal. He'd moved to this quiet corner expecting calm evenings, not a social media whirlwind over stolen pets and scratched cars. Each day brought new revelations. One neighbor posted a video snippet of Karen skulking through a yard at midnight, though it wasn't clear what she was doing. Another discovered an entire, anonymous complaint letter, in their mailbox, presumably from Karen, accusing them of violating random, made-up codes. Meanwhile, Officer Fulton tried to remain impartial but let slip that if Santiago's cat truly was found in Karen's possession, the legal ramifications could be severe. Emboldened by the mounting community outcry, Santiago launched a more determined search for honey. He double-checked every corner of his property, even shining a flashlight under deck boards at dusk, in case the cat was hiding. All the while, he fielded messages from neighbors offering leads or voicing solidarity. Step by step, the neighborhood's once scattered frustrations were coalescing into a pointed suspicion that Karen's controlling streak extended beyond petty rule enforcement to downright theft or harm of pets. Swiveling in his kitchen chair, phone in hand, Santiago typed up one more post, urging neighbors to stay alert and watch for any sign of honey. If the speculation was correct, Karen's malicious vendetta had reached a cruel new level. And if that were true, Officer Fulton might find himself investigating more than a scratched car. He'd be unraveling a case of stolen trust and, tragically, stolen feline companionship as well. For Santiago, the question wasn't whether Karen had done it, it was how far she might go if left unchecked, and what it would take to finally expose her wrongdoing. Jericho Palmer paced around his living room, phone clutched in a trembling hand, as he awaited a call from Officer Marino. For weeks, the cat named Clover had been missing, gone since the night Jericho heard suspicious noises in his backyard. Meanwhile, Karen, the same neighbor who relentlessly launched petty accusations, was the prime suspect in Clover's disappearance. The entire fiasco had overshadowed Jericho's attempts to settle peacefully in Crescent Hollow. Now, he'd just received a cryptic text from the officer, "We found something. Meet me at Karen's place ASAP." Jericho's heart slammed against his ribs. Could they have found Clover? He wasted no time, throwing on a jacket and hurrying down the quiet suburban street, streetlights casting flickering shadows. The hush of the cul-de-sac magnified his nerves with each step. Arriving at Karen's front yard, Jericho spotted 2 patrol cars parked out front. Officer Marino stood by the open doorway, face etched with restrained anger. A wave of dread swept Jericho. "What is it?" he asked, voice low but urgent. Marino gestured for him to follow. Inside the house, the faint smell of chemicals hung in the air, and the living room looked oddly pristine, as if Karen had tried too hard to maintain a facade of normalcy. Leading him into a side hallway, Marino paused outside a laundry room door. Jericho braced himself as the officer gently pushed it open. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. Clover, Jericho's beloved cat, crouched in a corner, fur ruffled and eyes wide with fear. Bowl aside, a box of rodent poison perched alarmingly close to the cat's makeshift bed. Jericho rushed forward, ignoring Marino's cautionary hand. Carefully, he scooped Clover into his arms, relief flooding him as he felt the cat's warmth and heard a weak meow. Why is my cat here?" Jericho managed to choke out, both livid and baffled. The presence of rat poison soared his anxiety to new heights, conjuring images of a malicious plan. Marino's voice was measured. "We suspect Karen took Clover, maybe to force some confrontation or extort you. The poison, we're not sure if she planned to harm the cat or if it was just stored here. Either way, the situation is grim." A swirl of fury and disbelief coursed through Jericho. He thought back on Karen's earlier attempts to frame him for trespassing, the nasty notes she left about unauthorized vehicles, and the lies she told the HOA. But abducting a pet? That was beyond a petty feud, this was outright cruelty. "Where is Karen now?" he whispered. Marino sighed, explaining she was in custody for questioning, discovered rummaging through her garage when the police arrived with a warrant. A neighbor's tip had led them to suspect she was hiding something inside the house. As Jericho clutched Clover tighter, footsteps sounded behind them. Another officer approached, carrying a small bag of evidence, cat food containers, cheap locks, and papers referencing Jericho's property. Each item served as a puzzle piece, revealing Karen's obsession with controlling or punishing him. The cruelty left Jericho dizzy with anger. Never had he imagined she'd stoop to imprisoning his cat in a laundry room, with rodent poison lurking nearby. Marino offered a subdued nod, apologizing for not acting sooner. "We needed probable cause," he explained quietly. But once neighbors shared footage of her sneaking around, plus your missing cat report, we convinced a judge. Jericho exhaled slowly, adrenaline still thundering in his veins. "I'm just grateful Clover's safe," he murmured. The next few minutes blurred. Paramedics arrived to check the cat's health, while a detective snapped photos of the laundry room. Jericho filed an official statement, detailing how Karen had been targeting him with false complaints for weeks. That entire night's ordeal underscored a horrifying truth: Karen's vendetta wasn't limited to property disputes, it extended to living creatures. The cat's frightened whimpers echoed that reality. Cradling Clover, Jericho left the house, flanked by neighbors who'd gathered outside, shock etched on their faces. Marino promised a thorough investigation and assured Jericho that Karen would face charges for multiple offenses. Jericho nodded, an unfamiliar mixture of triumph and sorrow churning inside him. He had his cat back, but the cost was heartbreakingly high. As the lights of the patrol cars lit the quiet street, Jericho realized this discovery would undoubtedly shift the neighborhood's stance on Karen's incessant meddling, exposing her not as a petty neighbor, but as a cruel figure whose destructive impulses threatened more than just property lines. Darius Mitchell couldn't quite process the scene unfolding on the lawn of Bayside Meadow. After weeks of hush-hush accusations and rising tension, there stood Karen, her wrists bound by handcuffs, eyes blazing with a desperate mix of anger and shame. Officer Torres guided her gently but firmly toward the waiting patrol car. A few neighbors peered from doorways, uncertain whether to be outraged or pitying. Darius watched it all in silence, relief coursing through him as he recalled the cat fiasco, the scratched car, the unending false claims. The hush that enveloped the street amplified Karen's final pleas: "You're making a mistake," she shouted, voice cracking. But the assembled neighbors knew better. They'd seen too much, hearing the rumor of stolen cats, seeing photographic evidence of vandalism, reading the false violation notices she'd thrust upon Darius. Now, the illusions she'd crafted were dissolving in the light of tangible facts. Some onlookers exchanged glances, half in disbelief that the meltdown had ended this way, half in quiet validation that justice had arrived. The arrest itself was swift. Officer Torres had calmly recited the charges: breaking and entering, theft, filing a false report, each punctuating Karen's flimsy defense. Darius had never imagined it would escalate to this extent, but at the same time, he knew she'd relentlessly pursued some twisted vendetta against him. Even as she was led away, her eyes darted back, like she still refused to concede that her grip on the neighborhood was gone. A wave of conflicting emotions rippled through Darius. He felt vindicated, sure. The nightmares of returning home to changed locks or slashed tires weighed on him less now. Yet he also couldn't deny a pang of pity. For all her cruelty, Karen had, at some point, been just another neighbor in Bayside Meadow, presumably hoping for a tranquil life. Now she stood disgraced in front of the entire community, labeled a criminal. Some passers-by whispered softly, "Poor woman," while others nodded in approval, grateful that her campaign of harassment had come to a conclusive halt. The hush broke when the patrol car's engine rumbled to life, carrying Karen away. Neighbors murmured among themselves, sharing recollections, how Karen once scolded a child for riding a bike too loudly, or how she tried to impose fines for non-existent HOA rules. Each anecdote painted a clearer picture of her downfall, culminating in that final humiliating ride to the station. In the quiet aftermath, Darius caught Officer Torres's gaze. The policeman gave him a brief nod. An unspoken gesture of acknowledgement. Darius mustered a tight smile, exhaling as though releasing the tension coiled within him for weeks. From that moment, the entire block felt a shift. People stepped out of their comfort zones to greet Darius, offering small gestures of support. His phone buzzed with texts from neighbors who'd once kept their distance, each one wanting to express relief or share a morsel of gossip. The resolution brought closure, but also a cautionary tale. No one had expected a simple property dispute to end in arrests and cat rescues. As Darius retreated inside, shutting the doors softly, he realized that life in Bayside Meadow might finally settle into the peaceful routine he'd initially sought, free from the shadow of Karen's intrusive, destructive presence. In the wake of Karen's arrest, the gossip in Palmview Court soared to new heights. Clips of her meltdown, complete with shrill accusations and frantic phone calls, spread across local social media pages like wildfire. Suddenly, the neighbor who once lorded over petty HOA disputes found herself an unwilling internet meme. People shared screen grabs of her dramatic expressions, overlaying them with ironic captions like "Neighborhood Policing, 101, or "Rent Payment Demands, click here." For Julian Roche, who had endured her constant harassment, the memes felt oddly validating. He scrolled through his phone, reading supportive comments from strangers. Finally, a meddler gets her due, or justice for Julian. Some netizens marveled at the extremes Karen had gone to, from forging rent statements to stealing a cat. Many had assumed stories about such a neighbor were exaggerated, until they saw the footage themselves. Meanwhile, the HOA board convened an urgent meeting after word of Karen's actions reached them. Several members had previously supported her strict standards, but now, confronted with proof of her criminal conduct, they retracted their backing. The board publicly stripped Karen of any authority she once held, removing her from every subcommittee or oversight role. A brief statement circulated through the neighborhood newsletter, stating that the HOA did not condone or endorse her behavior, and pledging to make amends for the undue stress inflicted on other residents. Julian watched with an odd mixture of relief and residual anger. On one hand, seeing her dethroned from the HOA dispelled her aura of self-appointed power. On the other, the memory of her lying to the police and tampering with his belongings still stung. He reminded himself that healing takes time, and not every outcome can instantly restore the peace he once assumed would define his home life. Privately, Julian continued with legal proceedings against Karen. A lawsuit for the damages she caused, from the scratched car to the replaced locks. Her malicious attempts at forcing him to sign a bogus lease, plus the emotional toll from repeated intimidation, formed the backbone of his case. He refused to let her off the hook easily, especially after the fiasco with the missing cat further exposed her malice. If nothing else, the suit might deter future troublemakers from believing they could act with impunity. Across Palmview Court, small signs of normalcy slowly re-emerged. Neighbors who had kept their distance began greeting Julian as he watered the lawn or set out trash bins. A few apologized directly, admitting they'd feared opposing Karen before. Some even left baked goods or small gifts on his porch, gestures of solidarity and regret for not stepping up sooner. As for Karen, rumors circulated that she'd posted bail, yet her position in the community was irreversibly tarnished. Even if she returned home while awaiting trial, it was clear no shred of the power she once wielded remained. The internet's memory was long, and the memes that had set her downfall in stone would echo for months to come. For Julian, that knowledge offered a measure of consolation, proof that, despite the ordeal, the truth had triumphed in the end. Weeks passed, and Dr. Theo Castillo found life in Glenwood Hills settling into a more typical pace. Gone was the tension that once seeped into his daily routines, no more peering out the window, half expecting Karen to appear with a clipboard of fictitious rent charges or brandishing a phone to call 911 on him yet again. Since her arrest, the atmosphere felt calmer, neighbors smiling more, as if relieved from an oppressive weight. News soon broke of Karen's house going up for sale, rumored to fund her legal battles. Many in Glenwood Hills expected it to linger on the market, overshadowed by her notorious meltdown. But a surprising twist emerged. A local nonprofit purchased the property, with plans to turn it into a communal resource center. Whispers abounded that it would be a place for underprivileged families, or perhaps a transitional home for those needing short-term support. In either case, it promised to embody kindness and opportunity, qualities Karen's presence had often stifled. The transformation felt almost poetic. The very house from which she'd launched her petty vendettas would now serve a beneficial purpose, a direct foil to her divisive legacy. A few neighbors voiced mild sympathy, noting how far she'd fallen. Others, however, couldn't mask their relief that her era of harassing fellow residents was definitively over. Justice, they said, comes in many forms. As for Dr. Castillo, he continued about his routine with renewed vigor. Each morning, he walked the perimeter of his yard, checking the roses that had once been threatened with an arbitrary HOA violation by Karen. Now, without her contrived complaints, Glenwood Hills returned to the supportive place it had appeared when he first moved in. Children rode bikes down the quiet lane, and senior neighbors planted fresh flowers along the sidewalks, the blockade of tension lifted. Occasionally, Dr. Castillo thought about the fiasco. He recalled the day the police confronted Karen, identifying the cat in her laundry room, the wave of social media condemnation, and how she'd become a local cautionary tale. He never took pleasure in her downfall, but he acknowledged a sense of justice in seeing the very property she'd weaponized become a haven for those in need. Officer Chong stopped by one afternoon, updating him on the final steps of the lawsuit. The officer mentioned that the nonprofit's director hoped to invite Dr. Castillo to their opening, wanting him to witness the community's ability to overcome negativity with purposeful change. It was an offer he graciously accepted, touched by the notion that such a place could rise from the ashes of Karen's malice. Walking back to his living room, Dr. Castillo couldn't help but feel a small, contented smile forming. The chaos left behind by Karen's intrusive agenda had, ironically, spurred a wave of collaboration and empathy in Glenwood Hills. In the end, her house would stand as a beacon of positivity, open to those who once might have faced the same brand of unwarranted judgment. And for him, the quiet acceptance he'd always sought finally settled in, reaffirming that no matter how disruptive a single voice can be, a determined community, and a touch of poetic justice, can reclaim harmony for all.